Claire was holding a pot of ghost orchids when she heard his laugh. The entire ballroom glittered with camera flashes, but it was Julian's gaze that froze her. Arrogant, familiar, cruel. He gestured toward her as if she were part of the scenery. "Amazing how certain flowers always find their way back to the wrong vase," he said. Laughter followed. But he didn't know that this party, these flowers, this entire setting, they were her creation. And tonight, Claire would show him that strong roots can support even the most silent new beginning. It was the launch party for the city's newest business center. Imported suits, shimmering dresses, and waiters gliding by with balanced trays of champagne. In the center of the room, a floral installation dazzled the guests. White orchids, branches of silver birch, and living moss, like a garden suspended in time. Claire, in simple work clothes, was adjusting the final details near the stage when she heard Julian Vance's unmistakable voice echo. "Well, look at this. Who would have thought? The gardener has become part of the exhibit." The laughter was immediate, sharp. Some people looked confused, others hid their discomfort. Claire didn't answer. Her fingers continued to straighten a silk ribbon on one of the stems. Julian took a few steps closer, a glass in his hand, his smile cold. "You were always good with flowers. All you needed was to accept your place." Under the table, and right there, between petals and averted gazes, Claire felt the past knock on her door, without ceremony, without warning. Claire Miller had never been ashamed of her roots, literally. She grew up between pots, damp soil, and the scent of mountain laurel. Her parents ran a small nursery in the backyard of their home in Maple Creek, a quiet town in rural Pennsylvania, growing perennials for local garden centers. It was a simple life. But there was beauty in the silence of the mornings and the discipline of someone who carefully waters what they wish to see bloom. Since she was a little girl, Claire loved creating arrangements with fallen leaves and faded petals. To her, even a wilting flower told a story. At 18, she earned a partial scholarship to study landscape architecture and botanical design in Philadelphia. She took 2 buses and a train every day, but she still smiled, because she felt like she was planting her future, even in hard soil. It was during her second year that she met Julian Vance. He was giving a lecture on sustainable ventures, an elegant disguise for projects that tore out green spaces to erect glass towers. Claire asked a sharp question about environmental impact, and he smiled, intrigued. After the lecture, he found her. He said he liked people who thought outside the pot. At first, Claire was charmed. Julian was charismatic, confident, a man who owned every room he entered. He took her to places she'd only seen in magazines, praised her simplicity, and said she brought peace to his chaos. But over time, the tone shifted. He started correcting her phrasing at dinners, suggesting more neutral clothes, asking her to avoid mentioning her background at business parties. "You're brilliant, Claire, but you need to learn to adapt. Or you'll always be seen as second tier," he'd say, with the air of someone who thought he was helping. She believed him for a while. She thought she needed to change to fit into his world. She started hiding her story, softening her voice. But the more she tried, the less she recognized herself. Until the day Julian simply disappeared for a full week and returned to announce he had reconnected with an ex-girlfriend who was more aligned with his current trajectory. Claire didn't scream. She just packed her things and left, with dirt under her fingernails and her heart in pieces. And that's when everything started to fall apart, both inside and out. Claire's biggest dream never involved wealth or fame. She wanted a house with a yard and a greenhouse open to the public, a place where people could come in, sit on wooden benches among native flowers, and just breathe. A space of refuge where every plant had a name and every visit a purpose. She called this dream the Greenhouse Project, a mix of a nursery, a sensory garden, and a community workshop. The idea was born in her teens, when her mother would take flowers to grieving neighbors and her father would assemble simple arrangements for weddings in local churches. Claire saw how people were moved when they received something living and beautiful, even in moments of pain. Flowers spoke where words couldn't reach, and she wanted to create a place that cultivated exactly that, beauty that heals. But after Julian, the dream lost its color. Claire went back to Maple Creek, ashamed of herself, not for what she had done, but for what she had failed to do for fear of losing someone. She spent months saying she was reorganizing her life, when in reality she could barely get out of bed. Her grandmother, Eleanor, welcomed her without judgment. She placed hot tea in her granddaughter's hands and offered silence in the moments when Claire just needed to exist. One day, Claire pulled an old sketchbook from a box she'd kept since college. It was filled with ideas for the greenhouse project. Native plants of the Appalachian region, layouts for garden beds, models for a greenhouse. She cried when she saw it, because she still wanted it. It still hurt, and it still felt impossible. Grandma Eleanor noticed. One afternoon, she led Claire to the back of the property and showed her something. A small structure of glass and wood that Claire's grandfather had started before he passed away. He always said this would be a greenhouse, but he never finished it, her grandmother said. Maybe it's waiting for you. Claire spent the following days clearing debris, pulling weeds and sanding pieces of wood with the delicacy of someone trying to rescue not just a space, but herself. She planted seedlings in cut plastic bottles, hung motivational quotes between the pots. It was all improvised, but it was real. Over time, neighbors started to show up. A grieving widow asked for an arrangement for her husband. A teenager brought his mother's plant to be repotted. Claire began accepting donations, selling small crafts. She started an Instagram account under the name The Greenhouse Project, Claire. She still worked mornings at a hardware store to pay the bills, but every afternoon she returned to the greenhouse. It was the only place she felt whole, and it was there that she realized, even if the world said her dream was too small, it still fit perfectly in the hearts of those who needed it. Even with everything she had lost, Claire still wanted to create beauty, not to be applauded, but to remind herself and others that dignity can bloom in even the most wounded soil. The Greenhouse Project. Claire's profile grew slowly. A few loyal followers, many curious onlookers. Claire posted arrangements made with simple materials, recycled paper, broken ceramic shards, dogwood branches, always with captions that spoke of new beginnings. But reality off-screen was less poetic. Overdue bills piled up, and the land where the greenhouse stood still belonged to the township, an inherited lot that had never been properly zoned. One overcast morning, Claire received a notice. She had to vacate the space in 30 days for urban restructuring purposes. She cried in silence, sitting among pots that still needed watering. She thought about giving up again. That's when David Chen appeared, a community projects coordinator from the county's conservation office. His assistant had sent him a link to her profile. He came in person. "Do you have any idea what you've created here?" he asked, seeing the greenhouse. "This isn't just a flower shop. This is public health disguised as a garden." David offered something unexpected, to include the Greenhouse Project in a pilot program for sustainable land use. To do that, Claire would need to formalize her business, get a permit, and present a plan. She had never done any of that. She froze in front of her computer, not knowing where to start. It was David who guided her. He introduced her to an architect friend who drew up a floor plan for free and recommended a lawyer who helped women entrepreneurs. For the first time, Claire felt she wasn't alone, but the path was uneven, with every step an obstacle. Denied paperwork, unexpected fees, nasty comments online, poverty chic, some said, amateur landscaping. And in the midst of the chaos, an invitation landed in her lap, a chance to be a featured designer at a major sustainable business event hosted by a new corporate cultural center in the city. Claire hesitated. The event was high-end. They expected sophistication, not arrangements made with gourds and moss. "It'll be a good way to show that sustainability is also about aesthetics," David said. "Your work needs to be seen," she accepted. She prepared an entire installation by herself, a mandala of native wildflowers, living mosses, and woven vines, a silent tribute to Pennsylvania's forgotten forests. The week of the event, she slept poorly, ate worse. She redid the installation 3 times. On the day of the setup, she arrived with dark circles under her eyes, but her heart was focused. When she saw the sign on the building, her body went cold. The Vance Center. The same last name she once carried as a promise for the future. The same name that now sounded like a reminder of everything she had to leave behind. Yes, it was his. Julian's. She found out he had bought the historic old train station and turned it into a hub for sustainable businesses. The same man who used to scoff at the idea of little plants that don't turn a profit. Claire thought about giving up, disappearing before the doors opened, but she couldn't. Her name was already on the program. Her work was at the main entrance. Her arrangements were scattered throughout every conference room. She took a deep breath. She remembered her grandmother saying, "If you run every time the pain shows up, you'll spend your whole life running." So she stayed, with trembling hands and her head held high, and it was in that tension between courage and fear that he saw her again. The official opening of the Vance Center was set for 7 p.m. The invitation was elegant, the atmosphere refined. An international buffet lined the sides of the restored Grand Hall, where antique columns met newly installed glass structures. Distinguished guests strolled silently among Claire's floral arrangements, praising them without knowing who had created them. She was there, invisible, just as she had always been in Julian's world. She wore linen trousers and a simple white button-down shirt, her badge hanging discreetly with her name and the title, Guest Floral Artist. When Julian arrived, the mood shifted. Men shook his hand with reverence. Women greeted him with kisses on the cheek. The official event photos began to be taken around him. He approached the central installation, the mandala made with wildflowers from the Alleghenies, with each petal representing a different local ecosystem. He furrowed his brow as if evaluating a sculpture of questionable taste. And it was in that moment that Claire, from across the room, realized he hadn't recognized her yet. For a second, she almost believed she would just be another name on the list. Until an event journalist approached her with a friendly smile. "Are you the artist behind this piece?" "Yes, it's incredible. Mr. Vance would love to meet you. He wants to have a word with the exhibitors." Claire hesitated. She felt her throat go dry. She wanted to say no, but something pushed her forward. Maybe it was pride, or maybe a desire to close the circle. When she approached, Julian was still talking to a group of American investors. He didn't see her right away, but he heard her name. "The floral work is by Claire Miller," his assistant said. "She's right here." Julian turned slowly. First, a curious glance, then poorly disguised shock, and finally, the old smile, the one with a hint of scorn. "Wow. Claire, is that really you?" She just nodded, keeping her chin firm. "Well, what a surprise. I thought you'd gone back to, what was it? The City of Daisies." A few people laughed, not understanding the context. Others just looked away. "You put all this together? Impressive. Still like playing in the garden, I see." The words were sweet in tone, but venomous in subtext. That's how Julian always operated, belittling with irony, disguised as courtesy. "Playing in the garden?" Claire replied, looking him directly in the eye for the first time. "No, I cultivate what you never knew how to recognize." His smile faltered for a second, but Julian never lost his composure. He took 2 steps forward, raising his glass, as if making an informal toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "isn't it inspiring to see old talents returning to their roots?" A few chuckles punctuated the awkward silence. Someone whispered, "Is she his ex?" Another, "How uncomfortable." Claire felt her stomach turn. Blood pounded in her temples. Part of her wanted to disappear, but another part, a part she thought had died, lifted its head. "You know what's funny, Julian?" she said, without raising her voice. "You've spent your life trying to build something that impresses people, and today, the thing that enchanted everyone here wasn't the building. It was the flowers, the roots. What you call playing is what holds the world in place." The circle around them fell silent. Julian forced a laugh, flustered. "Look, I was just kidding. No need to take it so seriously. We have history, of course, but—" Claire cut him off. "You don't erase history with jokes. It blooms, even on concrete." And before he could retort, David, the project coordinator, appeared at her side with a firm hand on her shoulder. "This is the artist behind the entire visual identity of this event. Without her, none of this would be here. Her work represents what this space aims to champion: authenticity, consciousness, and real beauty." There was a brief round of applause, timid but sincere. Julian, his face stiff, just shook his head and walked away, whispering something to his assistant. He didn't look at her again that night. Claire stood there for a few more minutes, her hands cold, her heart racing. But something was different. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just being, and even though it still hurt, for the first time, it didn't hurt alone. That night, when the last guest had left and the lights in the grand hall began to dim, Claire remained seated on the marble steps of the main entrance. Her hands rested on her lap, still clammy. Her head was spinning in silence. On the outside, she looked calm, but inside, she felt as if she had walked through a hailstorm with her skin exposed. It wasn't the humiliation that hurt the most. It was the memory, the way Julian could still use words like blades, even while smiling, the way the surrounding laughter still echoed, even after the audience had dispersed. And the worst part, the fact that a piece of her still felt like the same girl who once believed she needed his approval to be worth anything. She thought of Grandma Eleanor. She thought about how her grandmother would have reacted seeing her there, standing firm, not backing down. She would probably say in her quiet way, "You thought you were a plastic flower, but you're a stone root." But even strong roots get cracked. That night when she got home, Claire didn't talk to anyone. Not to David, who sent a message saying she had been brilliant. Not to her friend, who watched everything on the live stream. She walked in, dropped her bag on the floor, and went straight to her room. She lay down, still in her clothes, and she cried. Not the tears of someone who regrets, but the tears of someone who endured more than she thought she was capable of. In the following days, she went on autopilot. She answered emails, acknowledged compliments, served clients. But inside her, everything felt suspended, as if the effort of confronting Julian had emptied something within her. She went back to her grandmother's greenhouse and stared at the pots as if she didn't recognize them. There were orchids blooming, newly planted hostas, sprigs of rosemary growing in the beds. But Claire felt an emptiness that no flower could fill. It was only when Grandma Eleanor appeared with 2 cups of tea and a wise silence that Claire finally opened up. "Why does it still affect me, after everything I've built? Why does it still hurt?" Her grandmother looked at her with tenderness. "Because you're not sick. You're alive. And anyone who feels is still blooming," Claire cried again. But this time, there was relief in her tears, because there, in the backyard of her childhood, she could let her guard down. The following week, a plain brown envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside, a short, handwritten note. "Your work saved my weekend. Never stop. Anonymous." And with it, a printed photo, a woman smiling next to one of Claire's arrangements from the event. It was a small detail, but it ignited something she didn't realize was fading. Purpose. She went back to caring for the plants with a different kind of attention. It wasn't enthusiasm, not yet. It was care, one step at a time. David showed up a few days later with a proposal. "We're opening a new wing at the community center. A space just for local initiatives. Do you want to lead a series of therapeutic gardening workshops? Claire hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready. You'll never know, he replied. But still, you keep blooming, she accepted. Not because she felt strong, but because she was tired of letting her wounds make decisions for her. At the first workshop, 5 women showed up, 2 elderly ladies, a shy teenager, a single mother, and a caregiver for the elderly. None of them knew how to plant, but they all carried something inside them that needed room to breathe. Claire taught the basics, how to prepare the soil, how to respect each species' timing, how the light and shadow coexist in a healthy garden. And without realizing it, she was talking about herself, without saying anything directly, but every word was a scar reorganized into wisdom. At the end of the day, one of the participants hugged her and said, "You have no idea how much good this did for me." Claire smiled shyly. But in that moment she knew she was replanting something inside herself. There were still difficult nights, moments when old memories returned like weeds, but now she knew how to tend to the garden. She knew that silence could also be strength, that firmness didn't need to shout. And even if Julian never understood what he lost, Claire had rediscovered what mattered, her love for herself. Not a romantic love, but a deep love, from someone who recognizes her own seeds and respects the timing of each bloom. And with that, slowly, she stopped wishing she could disappear. Have you ever felt like you needed to hide just to avoid being judged? Have you ever swallowed your tears just to stay on your feet, even when everything was crumbling inside? If that's ever happened to you, comment, "I know the feeling," just so I know you're here, that this story touched you, and that, even in silence, we've never been so together. The second workshop meeting brought an unexpected surprise. A woman with grey hair and an anxious look was waiting by the gate before it even opened. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She brought a dried-out plant in a cracked pot. "My daughter gave this to me before she moved away. I thought I killed it, but maybe there's still time." Claire took the pot gently, examining each leaf. If the root is alive, there's always time. And as she spoke, she realized she wasn't just talking to Mrs. Gable. She was talking to herself. That week something shifted. The light returned to Claire's eyes when she spoke about plants. She started visiting farmers' markets again, trading seedlings with neighbors, sketching new arrangements by hand. Ideas flowed naturally. She was no longer trying to impress anyone. She was just being who she had always been. And that was enough. One day, David showed up with a bold proposal. The Cultural Center was organizing an event to honor social entrepreneurs. They asked for nominations of projects that combined impact and beauty. He suggested the Greenhouse Project. "You could create an exhibition," he said, "this time with your name front and center. No hiding." Claire choked on the idea. She still remembered the bitter taste of that night at the Vance Center, but something inside her, maybe anger, maybe self-love, didn't want to run. "It's time to tell this story the right way," she replied. For days, she worked tirelessly. She built a new installation with living flowers sprouting from pieces of broken furniture, as if beauty were emerging from ruin. Every corner told a piece of her journey, her childhood in the country, the abandonment, the silence, the rebuilding. There were no ex-boyfriends' names, no revenge. There was only rebirth. While setting everything up in the event hall, she was surprised by a familiar voice. "Need a hand with that base?" It was Mrs. Gable, now with her daughter's plant in full recovery. She wasn't alone. Other women from the workshop had come too. They brought flowers, words of support, and hands ready to carry whatever was needed. There, for the first time, Claire felt she wasn't just blooming alone. She was creating a garden where others could bloom too. A garden where pain became fertilizer and support roots. On the night of the event, she wore a simple dress of raw linen with a small wooden pin in the shape of a leaf, a gift from one of her students. There were no heels, no heavy makeup, but there was firmness in her gaze. When she walked onto the stage to receive an honorable mention for her project, the auditorium fell silent. She held the microphone with both hands, her voice calm, her chest steady. For a long time, I thought I needed to be someone different to deserve a space. Today, I understand that dignity is not negotiable. If you are taking care of something with love, be it a plant, a child, an idea, you are already building something greater than any concrete tower. Applause. Some emotional, others respectful. And amidst the clapping, Claire felt not pride, but belonging. On her way out, a teenager approached her shyly. "Excuse me, I follow you on Instagram, and I just wanted to say that your content helped me through a really hard time." Claire smiled sincerely. "Thank you for telling me. That's why I do what I do." That night, walking back home under a clear, dark sky, she looked up and thought of her mother, her father, her grandmother, and all the versions of herself that had once doubted their own worth. And she understood. It wasn't about beating someone. It was about finally stopping the fight against who she really was. The exhibition was over. The applause had faded. But something inside Claire remained in motion. For the first time in years, she felt she was building, not just resisting, and that changed everything. The greenhouse project was no longer just a greenhouse in her grandmother's backyard. It started getting requests from schools, non-profits, even companies interested in wellness workshops. Claire, however, turned down proposals that distorted its essence. "It's not about quick profit," she would say. "It's about teaching how to care." And caring was something she now did not only with her plants, but with herself. She still woke up early, still washed the pots with her own hands. But slowly, she started organizing her days better. She set aside an hour each week just to sketch new projects. She learned to say no to events that drained her energy with no return. She started therapy, quiet at first, then revealing. She discovered that many of the voices that made her doubt came from within. Voices planted, watered, and cultivated by years of contempt, disguised as love. One Saturday afternoon, sitting on the porch with Grandma Eleanor, Claire said quietly, "I thought I needed to become someone else to be respected, but maybe I just needed to remember who I was." Her grandmother smiled, taking a bite of cornbread. "Honey, you never forgot. You were just too busy trying to fit into someone else's shoes." And that was it. Claire had stopped trying to fit. Now she was creating her own space, one that smelled of sweetgrass and had soft music playing on the radio. The workshops grew. Mrs. Gable became a regular volunteer. The shy teenager from the event became her intern. David, now a constant partner, proposed a collaboration between the Greenhouse Project and a reintegration program for women post-incarceration. "You can teach more than gardening, Claire. You can teach dignity," she accepted. With fear, but with faith. At first, she felt the weight of the responsibility. Some women arrived silent, hard, but it only took 2 or 3 afternoons with their hands in the dirt and their eyes on a sprouting seed for something to break. And then to bloom. Claire started documenting everything. She created a small online channel called Growing in Silence, short videos with cultivation tips, stories of new beginnings, reflections on time and resilience. Nothing staged, just truth. The audience grew slowly, but with depth. Comments came from all corners. "You helped me breathe again. I found peace watching you talk about plants. I never thought I could bloom too." Still, there were hard days. Days when insecurity hit without warning. When exhaustion squeezed her chest like a stone. But now Claire didn't run. She sat. She breathed. She waited for it to pass. She knew that even the best flowers need shade to grow. One evening, after a long day, she received an unexpected message. It came from the state's new curatorial committee for sustainable events. A huge project, an international fair for ecological innovation, in partnership with universities and social entrepreneurs. They were inviting Claire to be the lead floral curator for the event. This time she didn't hesitate. She accepted calmly, and she proposed something bold. That all the flowers be locally sourced from social projects in marginalized communities. "I don't just want to deliver beauty. I want it to have a story. The committee approved. And it was in this new challenge that Claire found herself facing a mirror she had once avoided. She looked at her reflection, the dark circles, her hair tied back in a hurry, her firm eyes. She smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because finally she recognized herself. The event was to be held in the city's most iconic venue, the old railway warehouse, now converted into an exhibition center. It would be 3 days of fairs, lectures, sensory experiences, and art installations, all focused on sustainable solutions. The Greenhouse Project was invited to create the floral ambiance design for the entire structure, not just one space, but the whole event. This time, Claire didn't enter through the service door. She entered through the main one, accompanied by a group of women who were now her permanent team. Each with her own story, each with her own scars, but all united by the same mission, to turn soil into poetry. She led with gentle firmness. She delegated tasks, approved sketches, organized shifts. She wore beige tailored trousers, a light linen shirt, and a leaf-shaped pin on her chest, now her personal trademark. Her hair was tied back unpretentiously, her eyes attentive to every detail. On the eve of the opening, everything was ready. The pavilion's columns were wrapped in ivy and ferns. The entrances were decorated with tunnels of native flowers that exuded a soft perfume. Suspended arrangements floated above tables made of reclaimed wood. The central area housed the main piece, a circular garden built with recycled materials, where each plant represented a life cycle: birth, growth, decay, rebirth. The name of the work? All That Blooms Endures. On the morning of the opening, Claire arrived early. She walked through the installations in silence, like someone tending to a sanctuary. She touched a few leaves, adjusted a ribbon, lit some solar-powered lanterns. She took a deep breath. "This is it," she said to herself. "But it's not for them, it's for me." At 10 a.m., the event opened to the public. Visitors, entrepreneurs, students, journalists, everyone wandered through the pavilion, enchanted. Some were moved. Many wanted to know who had conceived it. And then came the moment for the opening panel, a round-table discussion on beauty as a tool for social transformation. Claire was invited to participate alongside architects, urban planners, and executives. She walked onto the stage without trembling, microphone in hand, posture erect. She took a deep breath before speaking. Sustainability, to me, isn't just solar panels or recycled materials. It's respect. It's giving space to those who have been silenced. It's understanding that a flower can teach more about resilience than any chart, because a flower doesn't fight the concrete. It grows where no one expects it to. Applause. While answering questions, Claire realized something. She wasn't nervous. She was whole, and that was enough. After the panel, a reporter from a major media outlet approached her. "Do you have 5 minutes? We're doing a series called Minds Changing Cities. We want to open with you." Claire smiled, surprised. Of course. The interview was quick but memorable. The journalist asked about her origins, about how she started, and for the first time Claire didn't hesitate to say, "I come from a family of gardeners. I learned early on that what is cultivated with love endures, even if the world tries to rip it out by the root." At that moment, a group of guests was approaching. Among them, the president of an international foundation for urban innovation, and, ironically, Julian Vance. She saw him before he saw her, but she didn't look away. He was smiling, as always, surrounded by influence, charm, and appearance. But as he got closer to the central installation, his eyes stopped on the sign that read, "Floral Design, Claire Miller, the Greenhouse Project." It took a second, and then he saw her. Unlike the last time, Julian didn't laugh, nor did he mock. He just walked toward her, a hesitant gesture. "Claire," he said, as if trying to find the right tone. She faced him calmly. "Julian, I saw your work. It's impressive. Truly." "Thank you." He looked around, trying to regain control of the conversation. You really turned things around for yourself." She smiled softly, but it wasn't a smile of reunion. It was the smile of someone who no longer needed permission to exist. "I didn't turn things around, Julian. I just stopped walking in circles that weren't mine." He seemed to have no reply. He tried to laugh, but it was empty, and soon he walked away, swallowed by a crowd of people who no longer bowed to last names, but to stories that touched them. Later, Claire took the stage again to present an expansion project for the Greenhouse Project with public schools. She received a standing ovation. She secured donations, forged partnerships, opened new paths. But at the end of the day, that wasn't what made her feel fulfilled. What moved her was going home, taking off her shoes, sitting on the porch with Grandma Eleanor, and watching the orange sky of the late afternoon while listening to the sound of the leaves in the wind. Because it was there, far from the spotlights, the titles and the wounds, that Claire knew for sure who she had become. The fair's impact was immediate. The next day, Claire woke up to her phone vibrating in continuous waves. Messages, tags, invitations. Her name was on social media, in local newspapers, even on a morning TV show that featured her installation, "All That Blooms Endures," as a symbol of sensitive innovation. But nothing prepared her for the interview that ran in one of the country's most read magazines. Under the headline, "She Turned Rejection into Roots," the story of Claire Miller, the florist changing how we see beauty and impact. The article began with an excerpt from her speech at the event and continued with a compelling narrative showing her origins, the workshops, the strength behind her simplicity. The journalist described Claire's work as a living poetry, sprouting in the cracks the world has always ignored. The public reacted. Emotional comments piled up. "I remember my grandmother saying that flowers aren't decoration, they're resistance. This woman represents me. I've never been seen. Now I understand I can still bloom anyway." She spoke as if she had read my own story. The Growing in Silence channel skyrocketed in subscribers. Old videos were rediscovered, and the messages kept coming. From teenagers in recovery, single mothers, women recently released from prison. Claire didn't reply to all of them, but she read every single one with teary eyes and a chest tight with gratitude. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, someone else was watching the interview, but in bitter silence. Julian Vance. The successful entrepreneur, the name behind giant ventures, was now dealing with a cruel irony. At his own event, the most talked-about figure hadn't been him, nor his projects, but her. Some investors he was close with began citing Claire's work as an example of authentic branding. One of them, during a dinner, commented, "This is the kind of initiative that attracts the youth market now. Did you see her impact? It's genuine. A rare thing." Julian hid his annoyance. He laughed, said yes, very inspiring. But inside, his vanity throbbed. For the first time, he couldn't control the narrative. He wasn't the center. He was a supporting character, and it didn't stop there. The following week, the building where the fair had taken place, the railway warehouse, received a partnership proposal from an international network for sustainable art. The proposal's name, Invisible Gardens, the Greenhouse Project Initiative, as a global model. Claire was invited to present the project in Lisbon. The trip would be paid for by sponsors. She accepted with humility, but without fear. At her farewell party before the trip, the women from the project threw a small, surprise celebration. Mrs. Gable brought a cake with edible flowers. The shy teenager, now her intern, wrote a note. "You taught me that beauty isn't appearance, it's presence." Grandma Eleanor cried, hugging her granddaughter. "Go, honey, plant hope in the world, but remember, always come back to water us too." In Europe, Claire was received as an expert in social impact through nature. Her panels drew educators, activists, mayors. She spoke of simple things, her grandmother, native flowers, hands in the soil, but she touched hearts because she spoke the truth, of transformed pain. Meanwhile, back in the US, Julian was facing a crisis. An audit revealed irregular contracts in some of his ventures. He wasn't formally charged, but his name appeared in reports and documents. His once untouchable reputation began to fade. Isolated, he rewatched Claire's interviews on his phone. Sometimes he would pause, rewind. He seemed to be looking for something, perhaps a past he could no longer manipulate. He tried writing to her, a short email full of discreet regret and vague terms. "I'm happy to see your evolution. I confess I was moved to see everything you've built. If you ever want to talk, I'm available." Claire read it, and she didn't reply. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because there was nothing left there. No conversation that needed to happen. No settling of scores. His story no longer crossed into hers, and that perhaps was the firmest answer one can give. Back in the United States, Claire decided it was time to make the expansion of the greenhouse project official. With the support of David and new partners, she opened a second branch of the project in an underserved neighborhood on the south side, focusing on sheltering homeless women. The space was named the Root Station, in honor of the railway where everything had bloomed. At the inauguration, one of the speakers from the Lisbon event sent a video. Claire reminds us that the real revolution starts small, with a pot, a story, a choice, and it spreads like seeds carried by the wind. The crowd applauded. But Claire just smiled and went back to doing what she had always done, watering a new garden bed. Silent, firm, present. She didn't seek fame. She never wanted a podium. But now it was impossible not to see her. Because when someone truly blooms, without rush, without shouting, without a mask, the world bows, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Claire had always believed she was too small for the world she wanted to exist in, not for a lack of ability, but because the world around her seemed too loud, too fast, too harsh for someone who learned to grow in silence. But now, looking at the new, suspended garden at the Root Station, she knew the problem was never her size. It was the space that others weren't willing to offer. Life taught Claire that you don't demand dignity with shouts. It is planted in daily gestures, cultivated in courageous choices, and harvested when, even with fear, you decide to remain standing. For a long time, she confused invisibility with protection. She thought that if she stayed quiet, if she fit in, if she didn't bother anyone, she would be accepted. But silencing who you are is also a way to die. Slowly, painfully, like a plant watered with fear. Today, she understands that her strength was never in adapting to hostile environments. It was in her ability to transform any soil, no matter how arid, into fertile ground for herself and for others. And that didn't happen overnight. It came from falls, from losses, from sleepless nights, and from the persistence to keep going, even without applause. The respect she had sought for so long in the voices of others now bloomed in the eyes of every woman who attended her workshops and said with pride, "I can too." Because the most transformative part of Claire's journey wasn't the public recognition, nor the invitations, nor the spotlights. It was the reunion with her own voice. The voice that Julian tried to silence, that fear tried to swallow, that the world tried to make seem weak, but it endured. And now it echoes, not as a cry of revenge, but as a seed thrown to the wind. A seed that says, you don't have to shrink yourself to fit. You don't have to be seen by everyone to have value. You just have to remember, even on the darkest days, that there is something in you that deserves to bloom. The strongest roots are not always the ones everyone sees. Sometimes they are the ones that, in silence, hold everything up. Months after the inauguration of the Root Station, Claire walked through the space as if walking through a dream made real. The vertical gardens were covered in flowering vines. The reclaimed wood tables now served as stages for conversations, workshops, meetings between mothers, daughters, caregivers, women who once only knew how to survive, now learning to cultivate. The greenhouse project had grown, but not in franchises or in magazine ads. It grew in depth. It became a silent symbol of everything that can flourish when someone chooses not to give up on herself. Claire, for her part, kept her feet on the ground. She continued to wake up early, have coffee with Grandma Eleanor on the porch, and water her own plants with her own hands, not for lack of a team, but out of conviction. That was how she reconnected, through touch, the smell of the earth, the time that flowers demand and deserve. Mrs. Gable became the workshop coordinator. The shy teenager was now studying landscape architecture on a full scholarship, with the help of a support network formed right there among the branches and roots. David was transferred to another state, but he kept in constant touch. Whenever he could, he would send photos of urban gardens inspired by her work. "You opened a door that many thought didn't even exist," he would say. As for Julian, well, the corporate world had already turned the page. His name still existed on plaques, in contracts, perhaps in some forgotten headline, but his presence had vanished from the center of attention. No scandal, no glory, just silence. One afternoon, Claire received an anonymous letter, a simple envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sentence written by hand. "Some flowers bloom late, but when they do, no one ever forgets." She folded the paper and put it in a drawer. She didn't need to know who sent it. She just knew that somehow that sentence summed it all up. And what about her? Claire kept on living, dreaming, planting. Her next project was ambitious, to transform vacant lots into micro-healing gardens in forgotten urban areas. She knew it would be difficult, but now she no longer walked alone. She had a forest around her. And at night, when everything was quiet, she would sit next to Grandma Eleanor, look at the sky and think, none of this would have been possible if I had believed my worth depended on who looked down on me. Because in the end, the strongest flower is the one that learns to grow even when no one else believes. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like. It shows that stories like this deserve to be told. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I read them all with care and reply whenever I can. And if you believe in the power of starting over, in the silence, in the pain, in the beauty that sprouts slowly, subscribe to the channel. This is just the beginning, and every new subscription is what gives me the strength to continue. Don't go just yet. Choose one of the 2 stories appearing on the screen and meet me in the next video. I'll be waiting for you there.